Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College, a program that invites you into discussions taking place in your community on today's local and global issues. Now, your host for Conversations from St. Norbert College, the Dean and Academic Vice President of the college, Michael Marsden.
Good evening. My name is Michael Marsden, and I'm your host for this edition of Conversations from St. Norbert College. Our very special guest this evening is Father John Deere, Jesuit priest and a peace activist, organizer, lecturer, and author and editor of over 20 books on peace and nonviolence. Father Deere is this year's recipient of the St. Norbert College Ambassador of Peace Award for 2009. Father Deere has received an undergraduate degree from Duke University and holds 2 master's degrees from the Graduate Theological Union in California. In 2008, he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. A longtime practitioner and teacher of nonviolence, Father Deere has written numerous articles and given hundreds of talks on nonviolence. Father Deere's work for peace has taken him around the world to places like Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, the Middle East, the Philippines, and Northern Ireland, to name just a few of the places. Our topic this evening is working for peace and justice in the modern world. Father, welcome to our program. We really are pleased to have you with us. And also, congratulations on the award. It's a very special award to us, and I hope as well to you.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, thank you for awarding me that.
Oh, you're a most worthy recipient. I want to talk a little bit about your earlier years, because you talk in your biography a little bit about your conversion to Christianity, because you didn't begin certainly life as a Jesuit priest and as a as an activist for peace and justice. So tell us a little bit about your conversion and how you got to this point in your life.
Well, I never expected any of this, that's for sure. I grew up Catholic in North Carolina and Washington, D.C., went to a Jesuit high school with my brothers and was so appalled, decided to leave the church, go to a good Methodist school like Duke. And then I thought, well, if you're going to leave the church, why not go all out and not believe in God? Mm-hmm. So, long story short, I was in a wild, crazy fraternity and at Duke University in the late 70s. Wow. And one professor invited us to do volunteer work, and I ended up helping out at the North Carolina State Hospital for the criminally insane, these desperately poor people. And that experience of being with very poor people really, I think, touched me and broke my heart. And then I'm with these wild, rich Duke kids. I was one of them. And I thought, what am I doing with my life? And here was the choice right before me. And one day I came to my senses and I said, oh, of course I believe in God. And all of life is called to love, and we're headed toward a loving God, and we're all going to die, and we're going to live forever in this universe of love. And God's going to say, what did you do to help my suffering people? And I thought, I have to give my whole life to God. And my next thought was, I'm going to have to become a Jesuit, because I didn't know anything else but that. And I did. In 1 minute, I went through this, I call it my St. Paul conversion. And as I tell in my autobiography, which is called A Persistent Peace, I went to my parents and said, I'm a dopey 20-year-old college kid. I'm going to become a Jesuit. And they were just appalled and begged me not to.
Really?
Yeah.
Why? Do you have any reason?
Well, the church.
They were also
concerns with the church, by the church, yeah. And very intelligent and, high-powered people in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And they begged me to wait for a couple of years. And I thought, I'll wait 1 year. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, St. Dominic, St. Francis, St. Ignatius, they all went to the Holy Land when they were young. Mm-hmm. I'll do that to go see where Jesus lived. So I go back and tell them, and they were equally appalled. And I planned this 3 months of hitchhiking through Israel. And the week I left, Israel invaded Lebanon. The summer war of 1982, called Operation Peace for Galilee, in which all orchestrated out of the Pentagon, and 60,000 people were killed. And all the tourist trips were canceled. And I went on very naively with a little backpack, walked through the war, oblivious to it. And it was while I was camping out at the Sea of Galilee, if you can imagine, for the first time reading the Sermon on the Mount, these words, blessed are the peacemakers, love your enemies, hunger and thirst for justice, that I saw jets swoop down over the Sea of Galilee and drop bombs and kill people 15 miles away, at the place where Jesus said, love your enemies. And it changed my life. That was a wake-up call. And there were sonic booms and all. And it was the daily reality of war. But I thought outright, this is what it means to be a Christian. If you're going to follow this guy, you have to live the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. You have to be a person of universal love the enemies of your nation, and be a peacemaker. And since those days, 1982, I've tried to do that. And that I entered the Jesuits right after that, going full steam to work for peace and justice.
Interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. That's much appreciated. Your biography also talks about you having served as a pastor of some parishes in New Mexico, but apparently for a very short time. I gather that your ministry is not really in the parish. Is that fair?
I've lived around the country now and done many different things, and I travel the world almost full time, lecturing and also going into war zones to express solidarity, trying to love enemies. But I had been working in New York City. I was the director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. I had just stepped down when September 11th happened. I went down to volunteer there, became the coordinator of the chaplains working for the Red Cross, and the organizer of the demonstrations against Bush's bombing of Afghanistan. And there was a lot of publicity about me in the New York Times. Some benefactors contacted the Jesuit provincials and complained, and I was asked to leave New York.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was 2002. Because
so that took you to New Mexico.
They said you can go anywhere you want in the country, or we're sending you to teach sophomore religion in Philadelphia.
Those are your choices.
So I moved to New Mexico, which is the poorest state in the country, and #1 in nuclear weapons, #1 in military spending, worst education system, #1 in drunk driving, domestic violence, suicide. It's this beautiful land, and this terrible violence, and the birthplace of the bomb at Los Alamos. And I had, until recently, 5 parishes, over 150 miles, just desolate high desert in the northeastern corner, and maybe 1,000 parishioners, most of them very poor. I went there in 2002, and just then the Gulf War, the war in Iraq was beginning. And wow, that was an experience. I began to speak out, and some people liked me, and one parish completely kicked me out. Meanwhile, I'm organizing Catholics and Christians to go to peace vigils at Los Alamos, and the Archdiocese gets most of its money from Catholics building nuclear bombs. So I've been in a lot of trouble for that. And trying to figure out, how do you be a good shepherd? What does it mean to be a pastor these days when we have nuclear weapons and war and poverty? And many of my parishioners had their kids going off to kill. Amazing, such terrible poverty. They would have been to Albuquerque once or twice in their lives. But then they go to Iraq, and they were killing kids in Iraq. And I've been to Iraq, and the only place like Iraq I've ever been to in the whole world is the desert of New Mexico. So it's been quite a journey. Right now, though, I'm living there, but I'm traveling full time. I stepped down as pastor to continue to speak about peace.
But your home is still New Mexico.
Yes.
Your permanent address.
Yeah.
You travel a lot in the cause of peace and justice to the places I mentioned at the beginning of the show. What would be some of the most remarkable experiences you've had during those travels?
Well, first of all, I would say I don't know why more people don't get involved in peace and justice, because the whole experience is remarkable.
I would imagine so, yeah.
It makes life much more exciting when you're trying to give your life to these outrageous causes, ending war, nuclear weapons, poverty. It makes life so meaningful. It's the best thing we can do with our lives in this moment. So I really encourage people to get involved because my life is so rich. Every day is an adventure for these last 30 years. But, that experience in Israel and Palestine, 1982 was life-changing.
Changed your life. Yeah.
And then in the mid-'80s, I went to live and work in El Salvador at the invitation of the Jesuits at the university there. And they sent me out to a refugee camp at the height of the war. And when the death squads came in to kill people, the theory was I, as a young white gringo, would go out and greet the death squads. And bombs were falling in the background. And I had no training for this, and these were just kids, like all war. These were just 18, 19-year-old Salvadorans with machine guns, ready to kill until they met a white North American. And that was a powerful, difficult, amazing experience. And the people in the refugee camp had lost all their loved ones. So they basically, by and large, had gone out the back door as the soldiers came in the front door and killed their relatives. So it was a culture of oppressed poor people who had also been being killed. And then the war, and then Romero did. And yet, they had more faith, hope, and love than I've ever experienced in my life. Even joy. So that was really the most formative experience of my life. And then, of course, the great Jesuits at the university were assassinated later in 1989, 20 years ago. And it's a powerful thing.
As were some nuns, I think.
In 1980. But it's a powerful thing to have known great historic martyrs of peace and justice. It does something to you. That's why I feel so passionately about this, because I've seen and been with people who are much more outspoken than I am. These people were getting 15 death threats a week for the 7 years before I met them. Their house had been bombed 21 times. And they were speaking out even more outrageously and publicly on TV, denouncing every government official that was involved in killing or taking money and all. Fearless. And they showed me what it means to be a Christian, what it means to work for peace, to give your life for the suffering people.
So you would see them as true martyrs for their cause.
Yeah.
What about Northern Ireland? You went to Northern Ireland, too.
Well, I'm a Jesuit, and in the Jesuits, after you're in for about 15 years, they pack you up and send you somewhere else in the world for a year of peace and quiet and rest and reflection and retreat.
That's Northern Ireland.
And they sent me to Belfast. So I said, great. And I arrived, and within an hour, I'm having lunch with Jerry Adams. My life has just been an amazing experience. That was 1997. I ended up working at a human rights center in Belfast. But just as the IRA announced the ceasefire, there was no peace going to be happening. People were still being killed. The British were still hovering over with helicopters. It was very scary. And so this was theoretically a sabbatical year, but it was a very powerful year. And it led up to the Good Friday Peace Agreement. And I got to meet so many great people, and many people had lost loved ones on all sides. The thing that was so interesting for me, and I think for them, I have a long-time history of civil disobedience, and I've been arrested and been in prison.
Which I want to ask you about.
Sure. But I'm actually an ex-con, and I'm a convicted felon. The government considers me a terrorist. And so there I'm in Northern Ireland, and I'm meeting all these Catholics who've left the church. And what do you do after 30 years of the Troubles, which have killed 4,000 people? The men all join the IRA, and they're bombing and killing people, and then getting life terms, or some were being released. I'm meeting a lot of them, and they're telling me they could never have done what I did. And I hammered on a nuclear weapon and faced 20 years in prison. And because of my prison record and my own experience of suffering,
you had some credibility.
I had a lot of credibility, and they were able to hear me on nonviolence. And Jerry Adams and others began to read my books and talk about, well, violence doesn't work. War doesn't work. Terrorism is not the way to bring peace. And they would have dismissed me as a priest saying that, but because I have this record, they're going, wait a second. And a lot of I think I had a positive impact on some people. But it's a great, great lesson, because the peace accords in Northern Ireland would never have happened without the United States and England forcing both sides to sit down and funding it, saying, we will fund a peace agreement and fund if you end the war. Now, at the same time this is happening, Clinton and then later Bush and now Obama continued to bomb and use the same IRA tactics of terrorism instead of stopping violence and negotiating and supporting nonviolent democratic movements. I think the lesson of Northern Ireland is that whenever the United States and other nations get together and fund peace movements and nonviolent democratic movements, good things happen. It works. People on the ground know they are tired of war, but they're unable to break out of their violence. They're so stuck. You need outsiders to come and help. Northern Ireland's a parable of hope for the whole world now.
good point. I do want to remind our viewers that you're watching Conversations from St. Norbert College, and our special guest this evening is Father John Deere, and our topic is working for peace and justice in the modern world. You've been arrested a lot of times. In fact, if I have it correct, you spent the equivalent of about a year in jail. I'm sure that the times that you've spent incarcerated have had an impact upon you in some dramatic ways as well. How would you describe those experiences? I mean, I'm sure some of them are longer than others, but nonetheless, your freedom is taken away. You're put in cells with other people who have been charged or convicted. How did that change your view of the whole prison system, number one, but maybe also the justice system?
Well, it's a horrible experience, and it's a great blessing. Gandhi says you have to work for peace and justice, given the world, the reality of suffering and poverty and war. But you try everything nonviolently that you can. You pray, you fast, you keep doing these, and you talk, you lobby, you talk to the media, you meet with politicians, you write, you give lectures. I've tried everything I can around the whole world. And then he says at some point you have to cross the line and break the laws which legalize mass murder in our names and nonviolently accept the consequences. And when you study our own history, if you think about it, it's amazing. The abolitionists, the suffragists, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, in the end, the change happened in every segment of our history when good people broke bad laws and accepted the consequences. Now, I'm also supposed to be a follower of Jesus, who was meticulously nonviolent and breaking the law all over the place. I wrote a book about it. You could argue he broke about 50 laws. And his whole life is a campaign to Jerusalem where he goes in and turns over the tables in the temple of the money changers in an act of nonviolent civil disobedience. And if you're doing that, you can be arrested and tortured and killed. And he's saying nonviolently, no more injustice. We're called to be people of prayer and love and peace. So I just figure this is part of the job description in a world of war and nuclear weapons. So that has led me to try different things in small actions at the White House, to military bases around the country, and to a very dramatic action when Philip Berg and I hammered on a nuclear weapon.
You mean an F-14? On
an F-14 in the Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in Goldsboro, North Carolina. We were invoking the prophet Isaiah, who said someday people are going to beat their swords into plowshares, and we were trying to do it.
How did you get that close? I'm just out of curiosity.
God.
Gotcha.
There's no way this should have happened. We walked at 4 a.m. onto a military base expecting the place to be completely emptied. And there were 10,000 soldiers milling about. 75 of these fighter bombers, engines running, ready to bomb Bosnia. This was 1993. And they carry nuclear weapons. And I thought, this isn't going to work. What are we doing? We just walked right through them all. There's no security with these weapons. I mean, that's one of the things our action exposed, why we need to get rid of them. But you're asking about jail. I was put in a tiny cell for 9 months, and I never left the cell.
Was that in Greensboro?
In Edenton, North Carolina.
Edenton, okay.
I never left the cell. I never went outdoors. And it was horrific because the walls were just closing in on me. It would be like being locked into a bathroom for 9 months. Only it wasn't, because our bathrooms are really nice compared to I think the place hadn't been cleaned since 1800. So, there's no justice in the criminal justice system. I had spent my whole life studying nonviolence and trying to practicing it. And that place is a training camp in violence. They dehumanize you. I don't know, why we continue this, because we're hurting prisoners so bad. 2.5 million people now behind bars in this country. We're making them, if they ever get out, into much more violent people. They don't have my history of nonviolence. Do you see what I mean?
I certainly do.
And so the whole thing is a complete failure, not to mention the simple injustice of it around the country, ultimately being the death penalty.
Now, you've chosen civil disobedience, and you make a good argument for it for yourself. Do you think it's something that everyone you think should choose if they believe strongly enough in a cause, or do you think it's only for the few?
Well, again, I come to all of this as a Christian, really, and I'm quite serious about that, and this is after much thought. That, and I hope I don't sound pious, because I'm in a lot of trouble with the government. Actually, I was expecting to be 6 months in prison this year for a demonstration in Nevada in April at Creech Air Force Base. But I think that ultimately this is God's work. The world is such a mess. So I don't say everybody has to do civil disobedience. I do say everybody's got to become nonviolent. Everybody has to get involved in the grassroots movement.
That's an important clarification.
Yeah. Everybody has to be involved in the grassroots movements for peace and justice. Somehow or other, life is short, the world's a mess, we all have to do what we can.
We have an obligation.
Everyone. Now, how you do that, it takes a billion different forms. And everybody is needed, from university professors and students, for sure, to church people, religious leaders, to lawyers, doctors, politicians. We need to create a whole new culture of nonviolence. And yes, as I was saying about the movements, you do need some people on the front lines, like Dr. King and Mahatma Gandhi, who show us, well, no, we got to stop killing people, and you can go ahead and put me in prison. And the dynamic is, when good, innocent people suffer for a just cause, it touches the hearts of mass population and can wake people up. That's what Jesus shows us on the cross to Dr. King and Gandhi. But I love what Oscar Romero said on the day he was killed. He said, nobody can do everything, but everybody has to do something. And that's my main point. We all have to become nonviolent. We all have to get involved. But I wouldn't say everybody has to break the law or go to jail for peace and justice. But if they're interested, come and see me, and I'll talk to them.
You give them some ideas. You've said that you're in trouble with the federal government, and you made the reasons clear. Are you also? What's your relationship with the church? Because in a sense, a lot of the things that you're promoting, the church has been less than outspoken about, formally.
You know, it's very interesting. I'm a Catholic priest and a Jesuit for 28 years, and my motivation for this work is Jesus. You know, I would say, just generally, even if you remove the spirituality question, he's the greatest person who ever lived. Gandhi said he's the most active person of nonviolence in the history of the world. That's a very interesting way to look at Jesus.
That is.
And I find a lot of hope in that. And Gandhi does what he does because of Jesus, and Dr. King because of Gandhi and Jesus. So he's my motivation. And then I look at the history of the early church. You have to be nonviolent. You can't be a soldier. You can have nothing to do with killing. And you can't support the empire. All that changed in the 4th century, and then we created the just war theory, which we've had for only 1,700 years. I mean, it does not go back to Jesus. So I claim I'm at the heart of the church. I'm at the center of the church, that I'm just upholding the Sermon on the Mount and the call of Jesus, blessed are the peacemakers, love your enemies, what he said to Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane, put down the sword. And I look at our own history, actually, it's amazing. People like John the 23rd and Dorothy Day and Thomas Merton, Oscar Romero, the Berrigans, during the recent war, the ongoing war in Iraq. I mean, if you read what John Paul said, which was not covered in the United States media, and it was ignored mainly by the U.S. Catholic bishops, he denounced that war every single day. He said, war is a failure, war is obsolete, war is not the answer. In many ways, he was stronger than anything I ever said. At one point, he stood on the balcony at St. Peter's and said, the whole world calls out to Pharaoh, let my people go. Who's Pharaoh in that analysis? It's George W. Bush. That's very painful political and biblical analysis from him, not me. And he's right. So I argue that the church is a peacemaking community. The church is the community of the followers of the nonviolent Jesus. The church is called to be the movement of peace and nonviolence in the world. And unfortunately, most of us here in the United States are at the heart of the empire, behind the problems in the world, whereas around the world, the church is a community of peace and justice. And we have to wake up to what it means to follow this nonviolent Jesus, to hear the call of these really great leaders, and not to be afraid.
So you're really calling for a reform in the church in the United States?
No, I'm calling us to return to our roots.
That's reform, isn't it?
I think we've maybe strayed from Jesus. I don't think you can be a Catholic and support war. I don't think you can be a Catholic and support bombing the children of Baghdad, building nuclear weapons in Los Alamos, or being silent. There are 1 billion people starving to death right now. And I'm not saying how that plays out.
Sure,
but you can't say you're following this nonviolent Jesus. You may be doing something. You may be a very good American, but let's not claim we're following the nonviolent Jesus. So the church is, we're all waking up. The whole world is waking up because we're in this new moment. And Dr. King said it's actually a very exciting time to be alive. He put it, and the night before he was killed, he said, we're going to be the first people in history to finally wake up to the wisdom of nonviolence. We have to, because if we don't, we're going to destroy ourselves. So I'm actually pretty hopeful about the church.
Good.
Because I'm hopeful about Jesus, as more of us are beginning to wake up to what he really meant. And I hope everybody will get involved and not leave the church or leave God, but really look at the political implications of the nonviolent Jesus, and you'll find it's a very exciting life.
Interesting. Of course, as you know, St. Norbert was one who called for a return to the truth, to the true church.
Yeah.
Interesting. Given all of your travel and all of your activism, how in the world do you find time to write 24 books? How does this work? I'm absolutely enthralled with that.
You really want to know?
I really want to know how you do it.
Well, first of all, I'm not that bright, and I was a dopey kid. And after I had this traumatic experience in Israel during the war in 1982, I entered the Jesuits, and that first month, literally, I thought, what am I going to do? I didn't know anything. So I started reading Gandhi and Dr. King and Thomas Merton and Dorothy Day. I meet Daniel and Philip Berrigan, and I look at all of them, and I'm going, okay, they all spoke out. So I'm going to have to speak out against war. They all work with the poor, so I have to do that. They all get arrested, except for Thomas Merton. The people, most of the saints were in trouble with the governments of their time, beginning with Jesus. So I figured this is part of the job description. And then I noticed that they all wrote. And it was quite shocking to me. And I thought, I'm going to have to write and say, what are we doing here? And I was a kid, and I was looking at Gandhi and getting ready to profess my vows as a Jesuit. And I noticed that when Gandhi was young, he professed 16 vows, one of them a vow of nonviolence.
16. And
I thought, well, I'll try to do that with my friends. And I thought, well, I'll write a book about that. And I was 21. I never studied writing or English at Duke. And the book took off. 10,000 people professed a vow of nonviolence, and I've been writing ever since. It just became a way of life for me. And I find that if you write a little bit every day...
You write on the road then, obviously.
And I go through spurts and, periods of it to where I'm home for 1 or 2 or 3 months of the year, and I'm not traveling, and so I can write full time. But I find that if you write a little bit, if you write 1 page a day, that's 350 pages a year. Yeah. So it's, as I say, it's just part of my regular life now. Speaking, writing, organizing, meeting people.
What's next?
I'm going to Gaza. I'm going to New Zealand in a week or two, actually, to be on a national speaking tour, and then Australia, and then I'm going to be marching, I expect, with Alice Walker and other people from Cairo to Gaza on the first anniversary of the bombing and destruction of those poor people in Gaza, right after Christmas. And that's what I'm working on this day as we speak. My philosophy of life is that if I'm going to follow this guy, the nonviolent Jesus, I always have to have some ordeal coming up. I expected to be in prison these 6 months. That didn't happen.
So you have more free time.
So I have more free time, and this opened up, and I think I'm going to do that. Then after that, I'm planning the annual demonstration at Los Alamos, where hundreds of us go every summer to sit in sackcloth and ashes and to call for the disarmament of Los Alamos and to work for the abolition of nuclear weapons. Bottom line, I'm going to continue, and I hope everyone will join me, to continue to speak out for the abolition of war itself and poverty and nuclear weapons and global warming, and teaching nonviolence and hoping that we can all become people of nonviolence. So I see my work really as a journey, and of solidarity with peoples of the world, a journey of nonviolence, and and trying to promote and teach and practice peace. And that's where I think the journey's going, but I never am quite sure.
It's quite a journey. It's quite a journey. I'd like to thank our very special guest, Father John Deere, for sharing his expertise with us this evening. Please join us for future programs as we continue our exploration of the world of ideas. Until then, I'm Michael Marsden for Conversations from St. Norbert College.